If you've seen the movie about her, you already know that Cleopatra is perhaps the most famous person to have ever lived. But what if I told you that her mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather were all the same person? Well, technically, they are. And we're going to tell you why this is the case, along with some other things you never knew about Cleopatra. Welcome to my channel. And today, let's explore what would happen if you married your sister. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC and was the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic kingdom of Egypt. And soon after Ptolemy II took the throne, he decided to follow in his father's footsteps. If both parents carry a copy of a recessive gene, there is a 25% chance their child will inherit two copies and thus express the trait associated with that gene. So, in theory, if you marry your sister, there's a 25% chance your kid will inherit a condition like Tay-Sachs disease, cystic fibrosis, or sickle cell anemia. First, it demonstrates how Ptolemaic rulers were deeply invested in preserving their family's power and identity. You see, by continuously choosing to marry their siblings and cousins, the Ptolemies created a royal family so enmeshed that it turned the cord into a tinderbox, ready to explode at the slightest spark. When Ptolemy III died in 246 BC, he left his throne to his son, Ptolemy IV, and his widow, Bernice, to serve as regent for their young son. It was here that he grew up completely unaware that he was next in line to the throne. Meanwhile, Ptolemy IV's wife, Arsinoe, had given birth to twin boys, but shortly after their birth, she passed away, leaving the king vulnerable to the wiles of his chief minister, Ctesibius. Together, they plotted to make the younger Ptolemy the heir apparent and cement Ctesibius' family in the royal line. But Bernice's younger sister, Arsinoe, was furious that she hadn't been chosen to be regent. She used her influence to keep the younger Ptolemy out of the royal court, thereby protecting her elder son's claim to the throne. The decline of the Ptolemaic dynasty was not solely due to their unconventional mating practices, but also the rise of new empires like Rome. Nevertheless, Cleopatra's decision to embrace diplomacy and forge strategic alliances with Roman leaders stands out as a bold move that defied some of her dynasty's most entrenched traditions. This adaptability, coupled with her intelligence and charisma, enabled her to navigate the treacherous waters of international politics and secure her kingdom's interests. She was successful until Ptolemy IV died, at which point she was forced to flee to Rome. Thanks for watching. There she made allies of influential politicians and built a coalition to return to Egypt and restore her son to the throne. So she fled to Syria, where she hoped her uncle, Ptolemy, the ruler of Cyrene, could help her seize the throne. But the coalition backing the true heir was growing stronger by the day, and soon Cleopatra found herself on the run. She traveled to Rome in disguise and won the support of Julius Caesar. By this point, the Ptolemaic dynasty was thoroughly corrupted by centuries of inbreeding, and Egypt was ripe for the taking. Cleopatra's forces were no match for Octavian's, and one by one, her allies fell. Eventually, Mark Antony took his own life, and Cleopatra was left alone. Knowing that her end was near, she allowed an Egyptian cobra to bite her so she could die with dignity rather than be paraded around Rome as a prisoner. With Caesar's help, she returned to Egypt and gave birth to Caesar. By marrying within the family, they aimed to maintain a pure royal bloodline free from outside influence. To prevent this, Cleopatra had her brother murdered. Soon after, Caesar himself was assassinated. Cleopatra then turned her attention to Rome's next great general, Mark Antony. Together, the two engaged in a decade of cultural exchange, travel, and romance. But this relationship enraged Octavian, Caesar's adopted son and heir, who saw it as a threat to his power. Second, it highlights the interconnectedness of biology and politics in the ancient world, showing how seemingly personal decisions like marriage could have profound implications for entire kingdoms. Third, it underscores the unique nature of Cleopatra's rise to power. Unlike many of her predecessors, Cleopatra was thrust onto the world stage at a time when the Ptolemaic dynasty was at risk of collapse. This meant that unlike many of her family members, who had enjoyed a life of luxury and relative obscurity, Cleopatra had to prove herself as a ruler through her intelligence, charm, and political acumen. There are also more subtle effects that can arise from inbreeding. You see, humans have two copies of every gene, one from their mother and one from their father. But Ptolemy the Cruel then tricked him and imprisoned him in a temple. But that didn't last long, because soon after, Ptolemy the Cruel was assassinated by his own bodyguards, and Ptolemy IV reclaimed his throne. He then banished Arsinoe from Egypt, although she later returned and bore him several children. And if they have kids, each parent contributes one of their copies to their offspring. So when two closely related people have kids, there is a good chance that the offspring will inherit the same version of a gene from both parents. Since most traits are controlled by multiple genes, this doesn't usually result in any noticeable differences. But the closer the two people are related, the higher the likelihood that this will occur. And marry his sister, Arsinoe, the daughter of King Ptolemy I and Queen Bernice. Now, you may be thinking, gross. But back then, this was actually pretty standard practice. In fact, it's still fairly common in the animal world. Just think of all the inbreeding that goes on in the British royal family. A cousin marrying their cousin isn't all that uncommon, but human beings are different. We're smarter, and we know that continuously breeding close members of the same family leads to problems. While she's often remembered as the Egyptian queen, this isn't entirely accurate. You see, her family was originally Macedonian, one of the several successor states to Alexander the Great's once vast empire. Ancient historians noted that she had striking violet eyes and an unusually fair complexion, which might have been caused by inbreeding. Also, one ancient author noted that she had an abnormally long and narrow skull. All of these traits could have arisen from inbreeding, but the answer isn't straightforward. Over time, they came to rule over Egypt, but they didn't really rule as Egyptians. They followed their own customs, religion, language, and rarely even learned to read hieroglyphs. Even their appearance was different. According to some accounts, they had large noses, prominent ears, and dark curly hair, none of which are typically associated with people of Egyptian descent. So if they weren't Egyptians ruling over Egypt, where did they come from? Well, their lineage can be traced back to Ptolemy, who became the satrap or governor of Egypt after Alexander's empire split apart in 323. He was a strong supporter of the new religion of Hellenism, which blended Greek culture with those of the other regions of Alexander's former empire. After Alexander died, Ptolemy successfully lobbied his fellow generals to grant him sole control of Egypt, and thereafter, he established a new capital city named Alexandria, on the site of the former capital, which had been deliberately destroyed by Alexander. Now, while Ptolemy was busy consolidating his control over Egypt, the rest of Alexander's former empire was being carved up by his other generals. It quickly became obvious that without military support from other regions, Egypt wasn't safe. So to secure his position, Ptolemy began marrying his daughters to the rulers of other kingdoms. For example, he wed his daughter Bernice to Magas, the ruler of Sun, and another daughter, Arsinoe, to Lysimachus, the ruler of Thrace. Through these marriages, Ptolemy was able to form alliances and ensure that his kingdom would not be attacked by his former comrades. When Ptolemy died, he passed his kingdom down to his son, Ptolemy II. The main problem is that recessive genes get expressed more frequently. Now, you might be wondering, did Cleopatra suffer from any ill effects of inbreeding? Well, it's hard to say. While it's impossible to know the full extent of the genetic consequences of this incestuous breeding program, it's clear that the practice played a crucial role in shaping Cleopatra's life and legacy. Let's rewind a little bit and talk about the betrayal and intrigue that permeated the Ptolemaic court. When Ptolemy IV reached an agreement with his uncle to return Arsinoe to Egypt, the plan was for him to marry his sister and officially make her his co-regent. But while all this was happening, the king's son, Ptolemy, had been sent to live in the city of Mendes, far from the intrigues of the royal court. As you might have guessed, the king's mother wasn't having it. Meanwhile, the power vacuum created by Ptolemy IV's death allowed Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, to seize power in Alexandria. Soon after, however, her younger brother caught wind of the fact that Caesar was planning to invade Egypt and steal Caesarion away. In 32 BC, he went to war against Cleopatra and Mark Antony. With Cleopatra's death, the Ptolemaic dynasty came to an end, and Egypt became a province of Rome. While Cleopatra's story is undoubtedly fascinating, it's essential to recognize the larger historical forces at play. Ultimately, Cleopatra's life and legacy offer a nuanced perspective on the complexities of power, identity, and resilience in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds.